Willie, you are not a stranger to Hong Kong because I think you used to come to Hong Kong quite a bit in the days when you were reporting or writing in the region in the 80s. And I remember you doing a pamphlet on Hong Kong soon after Tiananmen Square. Have you been back to Hong Kong recently, or have you been there back regularly?
I wish I had been more regular. I first went to Hong Kong in 1970, I think, when my first trip to Vietnam to cover the Vietnam War. And I went frequently to Hong Kong and loved it, always, through the 70s and the 80s. And then, as you said, after Tiananmen Square, I published a pamphlet called Kowtow, which was very critical of the British government for not giving a lot more visas to Hong Kong Chinese who wanted to come to Britain on their British passports.
But then you came after 1997, about, I think, 10 years ago?
Yes, I'm afraid 10 years ago was my last trip, so I'm longing to come back again.
Of course, in the meantime, you have become an expert in many specific characters in history, from Dubček to the Shah of Iran, Rupert Murdoch, and I think lately the Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mother. So you've been a really premier biographer. How does the life of a biographer pan out? I mean, do you pick a character and then what do you do? Because I think people like to know how you would want to write about a whole book on somebody else whom you might not even know at the beginning.
I think all of them have happened in different ways. The most interesting in some ways was the most recent, the official biography of the Queen Mother. The Queen herself asked me to write the official biography of her mother, the Queen Mother, which was a huge honor.
But why? But why?
I did a big series called Queen and Country for the BBC and a book with it. And afterwards, that was the time at which the Queen Mother died. And I said to the Queen's private secretary, when you come to consider who should write the official biography, I'd love my name to be of the Queen Mother. I'd love my name to be in the hat. And a year later, he wrote to me and said, the Queen has asked me to invite you to write the official biography of her mother. Do you wish to?
But for example, Rupert Murdoch, now how did that come about?
Well, that was actually a suggestion from my American publisher in the mid-80s. He'd just become an American citizen in order to take over, to buy television stations. You can only have television stations in America if you are a citizen. So he'd given up his Australian citizenship, become an American, and was beginning to build up his empire there. And my American editor rang me and said, we think this guy's really interesting. Would you like to write a book about him? And I had never thought much about Murdoch and never written about him.
Did you meet him? Did he cooperate with you on the book?
Not to begin with, but he didn't stop his friends or his family talking to me. And when he discovered, I think they let him know that I wasn't just doing another left-wing hatchet job on him, he then agreed to see me. And so I talked to him quite a lot over the years that I was doing the book.
I mean, did you find that you have to be slightly oleaginous to a character like that in order to get access to him?
Not really, no. I mean, you've just got to say if I'd said to his mother, I think your son is an absolute total rotten scoundrel, I suspect she might have said, Rupert, maybe William Shawcross is not the person we should always spending time with.
She was a very formidable character herself.
She was marvellous, yes. Dame Elizabeth, a great figure of Australian life.
Yes, yes. But how about the Shah of Iran?
That I was interested in because my father had visited Iran a lot in the 1960s and 70s when the Shah was still on his throne. And my father had been president of the Iran Society here. And he had a great friend here in the 60s who was incredibly nice to me as a young man, who was the Iranian ambassador, whom you probably remember, called Ardashir Zahidi.
Yes.
He was a great playboy and bon vivant and a terrifically colourful figure. And I was a young sort of 18, 19-year-old, and he used to invite me to the embassy with lots of beautiful, beautiful young women.
And caviar.
And caviar too. So I had a taste for the Iranian high life, if you like. And then when the Shah fell and was kicked around the world like a flying Dutchman, I thought this is an extraordinary story.
It is.
Because he had nowhere to go. This great ally of the West who'd been our sort of linchpin in the Persian Gulf in the Middle East for 30, 40 years, and suddenly just a flying Dutchman.
I reread that book recently, and it is fascinating, and it is incredible how quickly we seem to forget these extraordinary circumstances. Mubarak is the one that comes to mind, when he has been ostensibly an ally of the West for so many years, and suddenly he was dropped, like Daily Mail would drop somebody.
There's a phrase that I quote at the beginning of the Shah book about states behaving like this. De Gaulle, who's a brilliant leader, once said, les États sont des monstres froids. States are cold monsters.
Well, there it is. And then Dubček as well. I mean, he was obviously an extraordinary character during the Cold War, as it were. And how did you come about?
In 1968, the Czechoslovaks tried to revolt against the Russian oppression, and Dubček was their communist leader. He wanted to create communism with a human face, as he called it. A dream as well, or impossibility perhaps, as one has since discovered. Anyway, I had just left Oxford that summer, and I went on holiday in Czechoslovakia with my sister, and the Russians invaded, and it was just astonishing and very moving to be there and see the Czech resistance to the Russians. So I thought, I'd like to write about this. So that was my first job as a writer.
Are there any characters in Asia that you would like to try your hand on?
Gosh, yes, I'm sure there are. It's a very good point. I think I have always been daunted by my lack of scholarship. And I mean, if I wanted to write about a Chinese, I say Sun Yat-sen or somebody, I would feel I didn't know enough. I don't speak Chinese, and I would therefore not be able to do it competently.
But going back to you as a writer, which is why you're coming out to Hong Kong, in order to share with us and the public at large your experience as a writer, do you find yourself in more of a straitjacket than if you were a novelist, let's say? And if, when you are in a biography, you agonize, obviously, over interpretations, how do you generally deal with those normal questions?
Well, I think you're absolutely correct. You are in more of a straitjacket, especially writing about someone, and particularly if that someone is still alive and can answer you back if you get the facts wrong. So you have to be absolutely...
Did Murdoch write to you with a list of correction?
No, he didn't. In fact, I think Murdoch takes the view that he doesn't care what people say about him. He's very cool about that. He never sues for libel, which is very good, I think. The Queen sent me a message that when she had read the manuscript of my book, that I had made a serious mistake. I had got the names of two of her mother's racehorses incorrect. I put them back. I corrected that fault. But you're right, and I mean, but the key word you use is imagination. And I'd love to feel I had enough imagination to be a great novelist. I think a great novelist is a much more wonderful writer than just a biographer like me, and I wish I could do it, but I doubt that I can.
But do you think that the life of a person, I always think, is never one aspect, obviously, many aspects, and therefore sometimes when you catch them at a particular moment, you might magnify that to emphasize a particular point. And do you find you might have a difficulty, or you find them as particularly interesting as a reflection on their character?
It is an interesting thing to do, but you've got to be careful not to say that this, just because this episode is emblematic in some way, it's not the whole person.
Final question is this, and it is one of my eternal suspicion that de facto or ex hypothesize, when you're writing a biography, you are always trying to have the benefit, or you always have the benefit of hindsight, and therefore
yes, that's true.
You tend to fit facts into your imagination or your interpretation.
That's true.
And do you have to be very conscious that that doesn't happen all the time?
I think you do. You have to be very aware, and you have to be actually quite humble. And you never know. No, but neither you nor I know what really goes on in the mind and the heart of someone else. And and I'm sure that many of the people I've written about have completely secret lives that I know nothing about whatsoever.
But have you got a new book coming out?
No, I haven't at the moment, so I'd love to. Maybe this trip to Hong Kong will inspire me to do something else.
William Shawcross, thank you very much, and we much look forward to seeing you in Hong Kong in July at the Hong Kong Book Fair.
I'm looking forward, I'm longing to come. Thank you.